I have written eulogies for 409 of the honored dead. I know the shape of the work. You confirm the date, you confirm the wound, you confirm the ground they would not leave, and then you write the ending everyone already carries in their chest. I opened the record of the human to confirm the date of his death. The field was blank, not sealed, not lost, blank. The chronicle of the Corvette is older than most languages still spoken in this arm of the galaxy. We have kept it for 11,000 years. Every warrior who earns the bright ending is entered by hand, by a chronicler who has read the telemetry, walked the ground if the ground still exists, and spoken the name aloud before writing it. We do not lose entries. In 11,000 years we have corrected the chronicle 9 times, and every correction is itself recorded because a lie in the chronicle is a wound in the people. So when I tell you the death date field of Lance Corporal Emeka Nkimlu was empty, understand what that meant to me. It meant someone had entered a martyr and never closed him. You would know his name if you were Corvith. Muror Pass is taught to our young before they can hold a blade. One human, low-ranked, not even an officer, holding a mountain corridor against the Vash advance while a coalition settlement emptied out behind him. He was the outsider who died as beautifully as one of us. We put him in the chronicle for that. Cross-species entries number 11 in 11,000 years. He is the only human. I was assigned his eulogy for the 11,000th remembrance. An honor. I was proud of it, so I sat in the lower archive where the air is kept dry and the light is kept low, and I pulled the master file to copy the date into the eulogy's first line. The bright ending needs a date. The date is the whole point. It is the moment the warrior stops being a person and becomes a lesson. There was no date. My first thought was clerical. Old entries drift, a field corrupts, a glyph decays, and a junior chronicler somewhere 3,000 years back failed to migrate it forward. This happens, so I did what any of us would do. I went to the source layers underneath the canonical entry, the raw attestations the entry was built from, expecting to find the date sitting there whole, waiting to be recopied. The attestations disagreed with each other. One placed his death at the collapse of the northern tunnel. One placed it at the poisoning of the reservoir, which was strange, because a warrior facing his bright ending does not poison a reservoir. He does not need to. One placed it at the 3rd day, one at the 5th. A martyr has one death. That is the arithmetic of the thing. You cannot die gloriously on the 3rd day and again on the 5th, and underneath all of them in the coalition supply ledger that had been folded into his file as background material and never read closely by anyone. Because why would you read a supply ledger when you already know how the story ends? There was a requisition rations, water reclamation cells, a replacement sight for a service rifle, signed in a human hand, with a thumb mark the ledger authenticated. Nkemelu E. Lance Corporal, dated 9 days after the last day. Anyone said he died. I read it 4 times. I told myself a signature can be forged, a ledger can be misstamped, a name can be borrowed by a quartermaster too tired to care. I have written 409 eulogies, and I have learned to distrust the tidy explanation, but I reached for the tidy explanation anyway, because the untidy one was standing in the room with me, and I did not want to look at it. I looked at it. If the requisition was real, the man we canonized for dying at Mirror Pass had walked to a supply point 9 days later and asked for a rifle sight. Living men ask for rifle sights. The dead do not requisition. I sat with that for a long time. The archive is quiet in the way only very old rooms are quiet, where the silence has weight to it, where you can hear your own attention moving. I am a chronicler. My entire function is to close entries, to take the terrible open thing that a battle is and give it a date and an ending so the people can hold it without bleeding. And here was a martyr I had been raised on, a name our children learn before they learn to count, with his ending left open 11,000 years ago by someone who either could not close it or would not. I told myself there was a simple answer. There is usually a simple answer. I requested the full witness manifest for Mirror Pass, every attestation ever filed, sealed and unsealed. The system returned the manifest in under a second, and at the very bottom, beneath the 11 canonical accounts I had been taught, was a 12th filed by a Corvus soldier, struck from the record by order of the Chronicle House itself. The strike authority stamped and dated, the name of the authorizing doyen intact. I knew that name. Everyone in the house knows that name. I opened the struck account. It was 1 line long. The line said, he was the last living thing on that mountain, and he walked off it on his own feet. I read it standing up. I do not know when I stood. A struck account is not erased. That is not what the strike means. The strike means the Chronicle House judged an attestation false or dangerous or unfit to stand beside the honored dead, and set it aside with a seal so that no future chronicler would build on rotten ground. We keep the struck things, we simply do not believe them. I had been taught, as every junior is taught, that the strike is mercy, that it protects the people from the confusion of a soldier who saw wrong, remembered wrong, spoke in grief, and got the facts tangled. I had struck 3 accounts myself. I had felt good about it. I looked at the seal on this one. It was clean, it was old, and it named the authorizing doyen, which meant this was not a clerk's decision. A doyen does not personally strike a soldier's testimony over a tangled memory. A doyen reaches down that far for one reason, to stop something. I sat back down. I decided to do the boring thing. The boring thing is always the same. You take the claim you cannot believe, and instead of arguing with it, you try to kill it with paperwork. If Nikamelu died at Mirror Pass, his death would sit inside a lattice of other records, each one independent, each one incapable of knowing what the others said. A man does not die in a single document. He dies in a supply line that stops drawing his rations, in a muster that stops counting him, in a pay ledger that closes, in a next of kin notification with a route and a receipt. The lie is easy to write once. It is very hard to write 40 times without leaving a seam. So I went looking for the seams. The coalition muster roll for the Mirror garrison survived intact. The coalition kept better books than we like to admit. I found the roll for the pass. I found the casualty list appended to it, and there was the first seam, and once I saw it, I could not stop seeing it. The casualty list was written in a different hand from the roll. The roll was human clerical script, fast and slurred, the writing of someone counting live bodies in a hurry. The casualty list was careful, formal. The strokes had the particular weight our people put on the downstroke. A Corveth hand had written the human dead of Mirror Pass. I told myself that was not proof of anything. Coalition record-keeping was shared. A Corveth liaison could have transcribed a list handed to him. I told myself that, and then I pulled the ration line because rations do not lie and rations do not grieve. If a man is dead, his rations stop the day after. Nikamelu's ration draw did not stop the day after any of the 5 deaths attributed to him. It continued. It continued for 9 days, past the last of them thinned but unbroken, one man drawing for one man, and then it moved, not stopped. Moved, transferred to a different supply point, 40 kilometers down the coast, the way a living soldier's ration follows him when he is reassigned. The requisition was not an error. The requisition was a footprint. And once I had one footprint, I found the trail behind it. Faint, ordinary, the least glorious paper a war produces. A man drawing water cells and a rifle sight, and 3 weeks on, boots. He had asked for boots. I want to tell you what that did to me, and I find I cannot make it sound like enough. Our young ones learn Mirror Pass as a held breath, the human at the choke, the settlement emptying behind him, the Vash breaking on him like surf on stone until the stone was worn away, and the beautiful arithmetic of it, one life spent, thousands bought. It is the cleanest lesson we own, and here in my hands was a man who had spent nothing, who had bought the thousands with something else entirely, walked 40 kilometers to the coast, and requisitioned boots because his had worn through on the walk. I did the only responsible thing left. I tried to find the account that would put it right. Somewhere, I reasoned, there had to be the honest Corveth record that reconciled all of this, that explained the boots, that named the second Enkamelu or the clerical ghost or whatever ordinary thing would let me close the file and write the eulogy and sleep. I searched for 2 hours. I'm good at searching. It is most of what I am. There was no such account. There was only the martyr on top, clean and dated, that wasn't, and beneath him the whole living trail of a man the Chronicle had needed not to be alive, and one struck line from one Corveth soldier who had watched him walk away and said so, and been sealed for saying it. I had come to that archive to confirm a date of death, and I had instead confirmed a life. That should have been a relief. Somewhere, a family, generations gone now, had once had a son come home who our records swore had died on a mountain. That is the better story. That is the kinder one. It did not feel kind. It felt like the first cold edge of something much larger than one man, because a single false entry is a mistake, and a mistake does not require a doyen's personal seal to bury it. Someone with the highest authority in my order had looked at the truth of Mirror Pass and decided the people could not have it. I needed to know why, and there was exactly one person still living who wore that rank and might remember Doyen Threa received me in the High Archive, where the light is not kept low. That is a choice, the High Archive. The lower rooms are for work. The high room is for judgment, and everything in it is arranged to remind you of scale. The Chronicle's oldest spines behind glass, the floor worn in a single path by 11,000 years of chroniclers walking to stand exactly where I was standing. Threa had served longer than any of them still living. Threa had authorized the strike on Cole's deposition. Threa was, so far as the record and my own two eyes could tell, the last person alive who had decided what Mirror Pass would mean. I had rehearsed an approach. I abandoned it in the doorway. You do not maneuver against something that old, so I set the requisition on the table between us and the ration transfer beside it, and the boots beneath that. And I said only that the death date field of Lance Corporal Enkamelu was blank, and that I had come to understand why before I wrote his eulogy. Threa did not look at the documents. You found the boots, Threa said. Not a question. I felt the room change temperature, though nothing in it moved. An elder who has decided a thing does not perform surprise. I found the deposition, I said. Cole's. I read it under my eulogist's credential. I know what you read. Threa's hands stayed folded. You read a soldier asking me to hand our children a shorter word for our whole way of being and call it wisdom. And you have come to ask why I would not. I have come to ask why the Chronicle says he died. Because he is worth more dead. I have turned that answer over for a long time. Threa said it without heat, the way you state a load-bearing fact, and then explained it in the tone of someone who had explained it before, to themselves across a great many years. A living Enkamelu, Threa said, is a clever outsider who won a pass by tricks admirable. Forgettable. The Vash lost that corridor, and the coalition held the coast, and in 100 years, it is a footnote about terrain. But a Nikmelu who died holding the choke while thousands fled behind him. That man is a shape a Corveth child can be poured into. That man is the bright ending wearing an outsider's face. Proof that our highest thing is not a Corveth peculiarity, but a truth of the universe that even a human found his way to at the end. We did not canonize a death, Threa said. We canonized a use. You falsified the Chronicle, I said. I completed it. Threa finally looked at the papers, one glance, dismissing them. He gave us a victory. We gave him an ending worthy of it. He was not there to object, and his people were not ours to answer to. It was a fair trade. It has held 11,000 years and steadied 100 generations of our young, and you would undo it over boots. I should have stopped there. A junior does not press a doyen in the high room, but I had read Cole's 2 flat sentences and they were still in me. And I heard myself say that a lesson built on a lie is not steadying, it is a debt, and that debts come due. Threa stood old as the order, and still it was like watching a wall decide to move. You will write the eulogy as canon holds it, Threa said. You will close his field with the date the Chronicle already carries in its heart, and you will let 100 generations keep the thing that has kept them, or you will take this to the House, and the House will do to you what it did to Cole, and I will not lift a hand to stop it. I struck him to protect the people. I would strike you for the same reason and sleep. Then Threa gave me the ground I did not know I needed. There is nothing more to find, Threa said. The telemetry is sealed, it will stay sealed. You have a soldier's grief and a quartermaster's paperwork and no battle underneath them. Go home. I went home. But an elder who tells you precisely where you cannot look has told you the shape of the thing you are meant not to see. And Threa had just named the telemetry aloud, and telemetry is not testimony. Telemetry does not grieve, does not remember wrong, cannot be talked into a shape. It is the pass itself recorded, where every body moved, when the rock came down, how the water fouled. If it existed and it was sealed, then Threa had not buried a memory. Threa had buried a measurement. The House Review Board convened 4 days later, not on Meror, on me. The charge was soft-worded, the way our institutions wound softly. A junior chronicler had accessed a struck deposition beyond the scope of a eulogist's credential, and was, the notice said, in danger of confusing personal inquiry with the work of the Chronicle. 6 of them sat above me on the tiered bench, and Threa sat among them but did not speak, which was worse than speaking. The first questioner asked whether I understood the purpose of a strike. The second asked whether I placed my judgment above 11,000 years of practice. I answered carefully. I felt the room deciding, the way a room does, the small physical votes, a hand settling, a glance passing along the bench, one member turning a stylus over and over and then setting it down flat, made up. They did not sanction me. They did something more precise. They granted my concern in principle, praised my diligence, and moved that the mirror telemetry be brought up from the deep seal and reviewed formally by the board, in session so the matter could be closed with the full weight of the House and never opened again. They meant it to end me. To unseal the measurement in front of the 6 people most invested in the lie, let them pronounce it consistent with canon, and bury it a second time under a ruling no junior could ever reach. I should have been afraid. Instead I understood, sitting there, that they had just ordered the one thing I could not have ordered myself. They were going to open the pass, and whatever the telemetry showed, 6 of them and Threa were about to see it at the same moment I did, and I had already read what a Corvith hand wrote about the tunnel he did not hold. The telemetry came up from the deep seal in a black case 2 soldiers carried between them, and that alone told me something. We do not carry memories in cases. We carry ordnance that way. Mirror Pass had been a monitored theater. I had not known that. The coalition seeded contested ground with sensor motes, thousands of them, dust that recorded heat, movement, sound, the chemistry of the air. It is not testimony. No one filed it. No one shaped it. It simply fell on the mountain and remembered. And when the fighting ended, someone swept it up and it came, eventually, to us, and Threya put it in the dark. The board did not know what was on it. That was the thing I understood as the case opened. They had sealed it on Threya's word and never watched it. They were about to see the pass for the first time, and so was I. And Threya sat at the center of the bench with folded hands and the stillness of someone who has already grieved a thing and is only waiting for others to catch up. They began at the northern tunnel, because canon begins there. The board expected the stand. You could feel it in the room, the settled anticipation of people about to have their faith rendered in data. The human at the choke, the Vash breaking on him, the beautiful last hold. The reconstruction built itself in the air above the table from the mote's own record. Heat as color, bodies as motion. And it showed the Vash entering the tunnel in a heavy column, and it showed a single human signature giving ground before them, down the length of the corridor, slow, not holding, retreating. The member at the far left of the bench, the one who had turned the stylus over and over at my hearing, leaned forward. I watched the anticipation on her face change into something with no name yet, the particular stillness of a person recalculating in real time and not liking the sum. The reconstruction reached the far mouth. The human signature slipped past a fault the motes had mapped, and then the fault let go, and the northern mouth of the tunnel came down in a bloom of heat and dust that whited the display, and every Vash signature behind it went dark inside a few seconds. And the human signature was already moving to the near mouth, already bringing that down too, already gone. No stand to grave. He dug with a mountain and walked away from the room. Did not gasp. Our people do not. What happened was quieter, and I have not stopped seeing it. The member on the far left sat back. The member beside her looked at Threya and then looked away, fast. The way you look away from a thing you have just understood you were complicit in. One of them, an old campaigner with citations of his own, made a small sound low in his chest once and pressed his hand flat to the table as if to keep the floor where it was. They had come to watch a footnote confirm a lesson. They were watching the lesson come apart in front of the people who taught it. The far-left member spoke. Her voice was level, and it was the levelness that cost something. "Advance it," she said. "The reservoir. Show us the reservoir." Threya said. "The reservoir is not in canon." "I know it is not," she said, not looking at Threya. "Show me why." The motes showed the reservoir. They showed the human alone at the water in the gray hours, unhurried, working with the flat economy of a man doing maintenance, fouling the only clean source above the pass, so the second Vash wave would drink slow death, or carry their water on their backs and move slower still. Then the false camps, fires the motes recorded burning on empty ridgelines with no heat of bodies behind them, drawing the enemy's mass against ground that held nothing while 40 kilometers south, a thin, unwatched road carried a whole settlement out of the war. Then the sleep, the record caught it plainly. A defender who did not stand the line to the last but lay hidden in shifts of a few hours and rose and worked again. Because a man who is alive tomorrow is worth more than a man who was glorious today. Every shameful thing Cole had filed, the mountain had recorded, and the mountain could not be talked into a shape. When it ended, no one moved to speak canon over it. That was the moment I felt the floor of 11,000 years tilt. They were chroniclers. Their whole function was to close the terrible open thing and give the people an ending they could hold. And they had just watched the ending they had been holding for 100 generations dissolve into a record that showed a man who refused, at every turn, to die for their picture of him. The far-left member turned at last to Threya and asked the question I had come 4 days and 1 hearing to hear someone with rank ask aloud. "You saw this," she said, before the seal. "You saw the whole pass, and you struck the soldier who asked us to learn from it, and you gave our children a corpse. Why?" And Threya, who had not once defended the canon as true, only as useful, said something that stopped the room in a way the mountain had not. "Because that is not the worst of it," Threya said. "That is 1 pass, and 1 human. I sealed it to keep you from asking the next question, and now you will ask it, and you will not be able to stop." Threya looked at me, only me, down the length of the high bench. "You want to know how many others we have entered as the honored dead?" Threya said. Who walked off their mountains on their own feet. The board adjourned without a ruling. That, too, told me something. A house that means to bury a thing rules fast. A house that has just watched its own floor tilt goes quiet and sends its members home to sit alone with what they saw. And I went home knowing the count 3 I had named was now a question 6 chroniclers could not unask. But 3's admission was still only ours. It was a Corveth reckoning about a Corveth lie. And I had built my whole inquiry on the principle that a truth which lives in only one record is not yet a truth. I needed the pass from the other side. I needed the enemy. The Vash had lost the coast and, in the long way of things, made a peace and kept. Because they keep everything, they are worse archivists than us only in that they throw nothing away. They're war logs, not testimony. After-action record filed by field commanders to superiors who would decide whether to keep employing them, which is a document with no reason to flatter the human it describes. I sent a request through the coalition channels that still function, expecting silence or a decade of delay. A Vash archivist answered in 9 days. Her name rendered into our speech as Austri. She was, she said, the keeper of the Mirror Theater logs, and she had been waiting most of her life for a Corveth to ask, and she said that last part in a tone I could not place until later, when I understood it was pity. She sent the logs raw. She did not curate them. I think that was deliberate. The Vash commander at Mirror had filed daily, early. The logs are confident. The corridor is taken. The human garrison is broken. The settlement will be encircled by the 3rd day. Then the northern tunnel, which the Vash commander described not as a battle but as a loss of a column to structural collapse, cause undetermined. And you can watch across 3 days' entries the commander refusing to write the word trap. Because to write trap is to admit you were led by the reservoir entries. The confidence is gone. The commander logs water discipline, sickness, the maddening problem of an enemy who would not present himself to be killed. There is a line, Austra had marked it, the only mark she made, where the commander writes that his forces had killed the human at the pass on 4 separate occasions, and each time the human had failed to be dead. And then the line that had surfaced in our own scattered accounts, the one I could not parse when I first found it. Sitting now in its origin, the Vash called him, in their own logs, the one who would not die on schedule, not as praise, as a logistics problem. The commander wrote it the way you write about weather that will not cooperate with a timetable. That should have been the end of my cycle. Confirmation from the enemy's own hand, filed against their own interest. I had the pass from 3 sides now, and all 3 agreed, and the man they agreed on had won it by refusing every death offered to him. I could have closed there. I asked Austri one more question, because I am a chronicler, and the boring question is the one that finds the seam. I asked whether Mera was unusual, whether the phrase was written only of Nick Emelu. She was quiet on the channel for a while. Then she sent me an index. Not one log. 40 years of Vash after-action record from every theater they had fought humans in, and threaded through it marked by Vash commanders who never spoke to one another, in a dozen engagements across a dozen worlds. The same complaint in different hands. Humans who traded ground, they were expected to hold and came back for it. Humans who buried columns and fouled water and burned empty ridgelines and slept in shifts and would not present themselves for a clean and glorious killing. The Vash had a word for it by the end, a field word, soldier's shorthand. Austri rendered it for me as near as our speech allows. It meant roughly the unwilling dead. It was not a compliment. It was the name of a thing that had beaten them over and over on ground where by every rule of proper war they should have won. We thought it was cowardice at first, Austri said. She had come onto the live channel to say it, which she had not done before. For years we filed it as cowardice. It cost us the coast and 2 other systems before any of us wrote down what Urin Kamelu understood on his first day. They were not afraid to die. They simply refused to do it for our convenience, or for a picture, or for anyone's. And we could not beat soldiers who would not agree to lose beautifully. She paused. I have read your chronicle, chronicler, the public parts. I know what you made of him. I have wondered my whole life why the people who fought beside him would take the one lesson that could have saved thousands of their own, and bury it, and teach their children to do the opposite. I did not have an answer for her. Threa had it. Threa had said the reason existed and was worse than the lie, and I had heard it as a threat, and understood now it was a warning, because I had come to the Vash to confirm one man, and Austri had handed me 40 years and a dozen worlds. And somewhere in my own chronicle, entered in our own careful hand, were the honored Corveth dead of those same engagements. Soldiers we had sent to their bright endings on ground where humans standing beside them were, that very day, choosing to win and live. I needed to know how many of our own we had spent to keep the picture. And I already knew the count would not be 1. The board reconvened on its own motion. I was not summoned to it. I was summoned by it. The far-left member, whose name I will set down now because she earned it, Doyen Second Vask, had spent the days since the telemetry doing what I would have done and lacked the authority to do. She had queried the chronicle itself, not one entry, the whole of it. She had asked our own record a single question, framed the way you frame a thing, when you already fear the answer. How many entries in the chronicle of the honored dead carried a death date that no measurement supported, a death attested only by Corveth hands, filed after the fact, with the source telemetry sealed or absent? It is a question no one had ever asked, because to ask it you must first suspect the chronicle of lying, and we are the people who do not lose entries. The chronicle answered in the time it takes to answer anything. The number stood in the air of the high room and no one spoke it aloud, and I will not soften it here the way we softened everything else. It was not one. It was not a dozen. Across the 40 years of the human wars and the generation after, the chronicle held over 200 entries, fitting the shape, honored Corveth and Coalition dead whose glorious endings rested on no measurement, whose telemetry had been sealed or never sought, whose deaths had been written by the same small lineage of chroniclers and authorized up the same chain to the same rank. Vask had cross-checked a sample against the Coalition musters and the Vash logs. She reported it flatly, because there was no other way to report it. Of the sample she could verify, a number of the entries were like Nikemalu. The dead had lived. Some had died later elsewhere, ordinarily. Some had simply gone home. We had not merely mythologized a handful of survivors into martyrs. We had run a practice, quiet and generational, of taking any victory won the human way, by cunning, by patience, by refusing the beautiful death, and rewriting it into a bright ending before it reached our young. And here the thing turned, and became the thing this whole account is about, so I will say it plainly. The lie was never only about the dead. It was about the living. A Corveth commander taught from childhood that the highest act is to hold the ground and die facing the enemy. Does exactly that when the day comes. Vask had the other number too, and this was the one that emptied the room. She had pulled our own casualties from those same engagements. The ones fought beside humans who lived by delay and terrain and the refusal to trade themselves for a picture. And she had the count of Corveth who died holding ground that did not need holding, dying beautifully on days when the soldiers next to them were choosing to win and walk away. We had not just buried a better way of fighting, we had kept sending our children to die instead of it, generation after generation, for the picture. That is what Thria had meant. Not the people cannot survive learning a human outfought us. The people cannot survive learning that the thing we call our highest virtue has been, for 100 generations, a way of spending our own young that a low-ranked human looked at once and refused. Thria was in the room. Thria had known all of it, for a very long time, alone. Vask asked the question the board existed to ask, not why the lie was told. Thria had already given that coldly, and it had held for 11,000 years. She asked who told it first. The lineage of chroniclers ran back through the human wars, but a practice that discipline does not begin with a clerk. Someone had decided at the start that the first human survivor would be entered as a martyr, and had built the machine that turned everyone after into the same. Thria answered without being compelled, which I have come to believe was its own kind of ending, the only bright one Thria had left. I told it first, Thria said. The room did not move. Thria had been at the first of them, not Merer, earlier. The opening year of the human wars, a pass much like Merer on a world now barely remembered, where a human had held a line 3 shameful ways and lived, and a young Corveth officer named Thria had watched it, and understood in a single afternoon that everything the Corveth taught their children about how to be worth something was a way of dying that the universe did not reward. Thria had gone home with that knowledge, and Thria had decided the people could not hold it and remain the people. So Thria had taken the first survivor and given him a beautiful death on paper, and it had steadied the young who read it, and Thria had done it again, and built the lineage, and risen, and spent a very long life keeping 100 generations whole by feeding them a lie. Thria had chosen alone, because the truth was that their courage was a kind of waste, and Thria could not bear to be the one who told them. I have watched our children die well for 11,000 years, Thria said, so that they would never have to learn, they could have lived. I would do it again. I'm telling you now only because you have already seen the mountain, and there is no longer any point in the seal. Thria looked at me. You wanted to know why? That is why now you get to decide whether you're braver than I was. I was not brave enough to let them know, and I understood standing in the tilted room with 200 false endings hanging in the air. that the eulogy I had been assigned was no longer a document. It was a decision about whether a whole people would be allowed to grieve honestly or kept safe and dying inside a beautiful lie, and that the deciding had just, without my consent, become mine. The recoil came the next morning, and it came, as institutional violence always does, wearing the face of care. The house did not deny what it had seen. It could not. 6 of them had watched the mountain, and the 7th had confessed. So it did the older thing. It reframed. A formal motion circulated before I had finished my first meal, drafted in the warm procedural language our institutions reserve for their worst decisions, and it proposed that the mayor findings and the associated entries be resealed under a new and higher order, not to hide them, the motion said, but to protect the people from destabilization during a period of study, the study to be conducted quietly, by a small committee. Over a span of years, the motion declined to specify. I had read enough struck depositions to translate it. A period of study with no end is a grave with better manners. They were going to do to 200 entries what Threa had done to Cole. Only this time they would do it kindly and call it prudence, and I would be thanked for my diligence in a letter, and reassigned to a chronicle house on a world far enough away that the word mirror would never reach me again. My access to the deep archive was suspended that same day. The notice used the word provisional. Nothing in our order is more permanent than a provisional suspension. Vask found me in the lower archive. I was no longer permitted to enter, standing in it anyway, because no one had yet had the heart to change the locks. She did not tell me to fight. She told me the vote count, 4 for the reseal, 2 against. 1 abstaining, which in our house counts with the majority. So it was effectively 5-2, and the 2 were her and 1 old campaigner, and it would be called in 3 days, and I would not be permitted to speak at it because I no longer held archive standing. They are not evil, she said. It was not a defense, it was a diagnosis. They saw the mountain, and they believed it, and then they went home and imagined telling their own children that the way we die is a waste and they could not do it. Threa was not a monster who fooled 100 generations. Threa was the first of us to flinch, and now every one of them wants to flinch too and call it protecting the people. She looked at me. You cannot out-argue a flinch. You can only give them something worse to be afraid of than the truth. I spent 2 days looking for the lever, and I found it where I should have looked first, in the thing the house believes about itself. The Chronicle of the Corveth opens with a charter. Every junior copies it out by hand as their first act in the order. I had copied it out myself, and never once read it as a weapon. It is 11,000 years old, and it does not talk about glory. It talks about the dead. Its first principle, the load-bearing sentence of our whole practice, is that the chronicle exists so that the honored dead are remembered as they were, that the people might know themselves truly remembered as they were, not as they were useful, not as they steadied the young, as they were. Threa had violated the charter to serve the people, and the House was about to violate it again for the same reason. And neither of them could do so while looking directly at the sentence every one of them had written out in their own hand on their first day. So I did not petition the House. I did not have standing to petition the House. I did the one thing a suspended junior could still do, which was to file. I filed a formal entry, not an argument, an entry, in the Chronicle's own proper form, for Lance Corporal Emeka Nkemelu. I gave him the requisition, the ration trail, the boots, the northern tunnel as the mountain recorded it. Cole's struck words restored, the Vash commanders would not die on schedule. I gave him his life. And at the head of it, where an entry carries its justification, I copied out the charter's first sentence in my own hand, and beneath it I wrote a single line, that to remember this man as dead was to remember him as he was useful and not as he was, and that a chronicle which does that is not a chronicle. Then I submitted it into the open queue, where every entry goes, where it cannot be quietly killed but only formally rejected on the record by name. To reseal Mirror, now the House would have to reject that entry in writing, which meant that 4 doyens who had each copied the charter's first sentence onto their first page would have to sign their names to a document striking down that same sentence, and it would sit in the Chronicle forever. The day the House of the Corveth ruled that the honored dead should be remembered as useful rather than as they were. They convened the vote a day early. I think they wanted it over. I was not permitted in the room. Vask sat in it and carried my filing to the bench and read the charter's first sentence aloud before the count, which she was permitted to do and they had not thought to forbid. And then there was a long quiet she described to me afterward, the sound of 7 of the oldest chroniclers alive, each looking at a sentence in their own handwriting. The reseal failed. Not gloriously. Not 4 converted to the truth in a rush of conscience. It failed by 1 vote, the abstaining member declining, at the last to be the name beneath a rejection of the charter and abstaining the other way, and that was all it took, and I have learned since not to need my victories cleaner than that. Mirror would stay open. Ninkamelu's entry would stand in the queue. But an entry in the queue is not an entry in the chronicle. It has been filed. It has not been accepted. Acceptance requires the thing I had been avoiding since the day I found a blank field, the thing no requisition or telemetry or enemy log could substitute for. The one witness I had reconstructed a whole man around without ever once hearing him speak. The house would not enter Kamelu as living on my word, or Coles, or the mountains, or the enemies. They would enter him only if the man could, somehow, still speak for himself. The voice log had been in my hands the entire time. That is the part I am least proud of. When I first pulled Nekamelu's file in the hour before I found the blank field, the system had returned the usual attachments, the roll, the citations, the supply ledger I would later read too closely. Among them was a personal effects manifest, the coalition's inventory of what a soldier carried, and on that manifest, logged and stored and never once accessed in 11,000 years, was a field recorder. Humans kept them, a private log spoken into in the dark, the way some people need to set the day down outside their own skull before they can sleep. I had seen the line on the manifest and skipped past it, because I was looking for a date of death, and a living man's voice is not where you look for one. I went back to it now because the house had left me no other road. They would not enter him as living on evidence about him. They wanted him, so I requested the recorder's contents through the one credential still mine, the eulogists, which no one had thought to revoke because no one now expected me to write a eulogy, and the archive, obedient and indifferent, gave me 11,000 years of a dead man's silence and then his voice. He did not perform for it. That is the first thing. I had built a man out of requisitions and enemy logs and a soldier's grief, and I had, without meaning to, made him a little grand, the way you cannot help making the people you reconstruct. The voice was not grand. It was tired. It talked about his feet. It talked about water, and about a sergeant named Ruiz who I had to go and find on the roll and who had died, really died, measurably, entered honestly, 2 days into the pass. He talked about Ruiz for a while, then he talked about the tunnel, and I stopped breathing the way you do. When a thing you reconstructed from the outside speaks from the inside and matches. They want me to hold the mouth, he said, flat to himself. In the dark, coalition once a line on a map held. Ruiz would have held it. Ruiz held it, and now Ruiz is in the ground and the line's still where it was. So what did the line cost and what did it buy? A long pause on the recording. Just the wind on the moats. I'm not holding the mouth. I'm going to let them come in and I'm going to put the mountain on top of them and then I'm going to do the next thing and the thing after that until the road's empty and my people are gone. And if somebody writes it down after, they can write it however they want. I'll be home. That was all. He did not explain his philosophy. He did not know he had one. He had looked at a dead friend and a held line and done the arithmetic that Threa spent 11,000 years unable to let a people do, and he had done it in about the length of time it takes to lace a boot. Because to him it was not a doctrine or a heresy or the load-bearing lie of a civilization. It was just obvious. That was the thing that undid me, in the end. Not that he was brave. That to him it was not even a choice worth arguing about. I brought the recording to Threa before I brought it to the house. I do not fully know why. I told myself it was procedure, that the one who told the lie first should hear the man unmake it. But I think it was something worse and more honest. I think I wanted the oldest chronicler alive to hear before anyone else. The voice of the person who had proven that the thing Threa gave a whole life to protecting the people from was not a wound at all. Only a fact, and an easy one that a tired man carried lightly. Threa listened to all of it without moving. The feet. Ruiz. The tunnel. I'll be home. When it ended, Threa was quiet for a long time, and then Threa did not defend the lie and did not attack the man, and said only one thing, and it was not what I expected, and I have carried it since. He is not angry, Threa said. No, I said. I spent 11,000 years certain that if the people learned the truth, it would break them, that they would grieve every child we sent to the beautiful death and hate us, and hate themselves, and come apart. Threa's hands were not folded now. I built the whole of it around the certainty that the truth was unbearable, and here is the man himself holding it, and it does not weigh anything. He is not angry. He just went home. Threa looked at me, and something in the oldest face I knew had come loose. I was not protecting the people from a truth they could not survive. I was protecting myself from finding out they could. It is easier to guard a wound than to admit there was never a wound. Only a door none of us would walk through. Threa did not tell me to enter the recording. Threa told me it would be enough. which from that mouth was the same as surrender. And then Threa said the thing that set the last stone for what was coming. When you take it to the house, Threa said, do not argue it. Do not read them the charter again, or the logs, or the count. They have had enough of being reasoned into the truth. A truth you are argued into is one you can argue back out of later, alone at night. Threa stood slow, wall deciding to move. For what I understood would be near the last time. Show them the pass, all of it from his first day to the empty road. Let them watch the whole thing at the pace he lived it, every ugly patient, living hour of it, until there is nothing left in the room to believe except what he did. Make them sit in it. That is the only kind of knowing that holds, and that is how I came to spend the days before the final session doing the thing no chronicler had done in 11,000 years, and the thing this whole account has been walking toward, assembling every source I had, the mountain and the enemy, and the man's own voice, into a single unbroken reconstruction of Mirror Pass, so that the House of the Corveth could stop being told what a human did there and watch it. They gathered in the High Archive on the appointed day, all 7, and this time I was permitted in the room, because you cannot bar the chronicler who is about to show you the thing you asked to see. Vask had restored my standing by the only means available to her, which was to make my presence the house's decision rather than its mercy. Threa sat at the center of the bench where Threa had always sat and did not speak and did not need to. I had built the reconstruction to Threa's instruction. I did not intend to say a word I did not have to. I began where he began. Day 1, and I gave them the whole of it, not the highlights, the hours. The mountain assembled itself above the table from every source at once, the moat's heat and motion, the Vash commander's timestamps laid over it, the man's own voice threaded underneath where the recorder had caught it, so that for the first time in 11,000 years the pass existed as a single thing and not as a story about a thing. I showed them Ruiz. I had decided that the night before that they would not get the human alone. They would get the friend who died holding the mouth the honest way, the bright ending way, 2 days in, measurably, so that when Kamelu chose the other road, they would understand he had already watched the beautiful death up close and counted what it bought. The line held. Ruiz was in the ground. The line was still where it had been. The board watched a man do that arithmetic in real time, and I let the silence after it be long. Then I let them come. The northern tunnel at the pace it happened, which is the thing no telling had ever preserved. He did not spring a clever trap. That is the lie of every clean story, that cunning is quick. It was slow. He gave ground for 6 hours. 6 hours of a single human signature retreating down a corridor while a Vash column pressed after it. 6 hours of a man spending the dark in his own nerve, letting an enemy believe with every meter that they were winning because a trap is only terrain until the enemy commits to it, and the committing takes as long as it takes. I made them sit in all 6 hours. I compressed nothing. I watched the far left member's hand move to the table's edge and stay there, and when the mouth finally came down and the column went dark, no one in the room felt triumph, because I had made them earn the exhaustion of it first, and exhaustion is the truth of the thing, and triumph is the lie. I gave them the reservoir the same way. The gray hours, the man alone at the water doing something quiet and terrible and necessary, and his voice on the recording while he did it, talking not about strategy but about whether the fouling agent would carry downstream far enough. The practical worry of a working man, and I heard one of the doyens make the low sound in the chest that the old campaigner had made at the first telemetry, the sound of a warrior recognizing work. I gave them the false camps, the fires on the empty ridgelines, and laid over them from the Vash logs, the commander's own orders massing his strength against ground that held nothing, and laid under that, from the coalition muster, the road, the thin, unwatched road, 40 kilometers south, and the settlement moving down it in the hours the enemy spent besieging a lie. I put the two things in the air at once. The enemy fighting a mountain that was empty. The people walking free down a road no one guarded, and I did not say what it meant. I did not have to. The House of the Corveth watched a man hold a pass by making sure the enemy was always looking at the wrong thing, and understood without being told that this was the whole of it, that every ugly, patient, shameful hour had been bought to purchase those figures on that road, and that the figures on the road were the point, and had always been the point, and the glorious death we had written was not even in the building. I showed them the sleep. I made a decision about the sleep. I could have passed over it, the least dramatic thing a soldier does, but Cole had filed it, and the mountain had recorded it, and it was, I had come to believe, the truest tactic he had, so I gave it to them in full, the man lying hidden in shifts of a few hours across days, rising, working, hiding, rising, Because a defender who is alive at dawn is worth more than a hero who is not, and there is no glory in it anywhere, and it won the pass more surely than any stand could have. I let them watch a man refuse over and over across a week to die for their picture in the smallest and most human way there is, by sleeping so that he could keep going. And then I gave them the last hour. The road empty. The settlement gone. The Vash broken on a mountain that had never held what they thought it held. And the single human signature at the end of it, not falling, not held aloft, not entering any bright ending, just moving south, down off the mountain on his own feet, following his people down the road he had bought them, while his own voice on the recording said the last thing the recorder ever caught: tired and flat and final roads, empty. That's it, going home. I ended it there. I did not append a conclusion. Threa had told me not to argue, and I had learned by then that Threa was right, that the pass argued better than I ever could, and I let the reconstruction go dark over the table, and I stood in the quiet and waited. No one spoke canon over it. No one could. They had come across 7 sessions from expecting the confirmation of their highest lesson to watching that lesson dissolve, and now they had sat inside the whole of what actually happened at the pace a man had lived it, and there was nothing left in the room to believe except what he did. I watched it move along the bench, the knowing one doyen at a time, the way disbelief recalculating always moves through people who thought they understood a thing, a hand unclenching, a head lowered, the old campaigner covering his eyes with one hand and leaving it there. Vask spoke first because someone had to, and she was the bravest of them. Enter him, she said, as he was, and the house of the Corveth, which had not corrected the chronicle in 9 times 1100 years, which had built 100 generations on the beautiful death, sat in the wreckage of the pass, and one voice after another down the bench agreed. They entered him that day, but I did not write the entry that day. An entry made in the heat of a room is a kind of performance, and I had spent a season learning what performance costs. I waited until the house had gone and the high archive was empty and the light had been let back down to the level we keep for work. And then I sat with the file that had started all of it, the one with the blank field, and I did the plain thing at last. I closed the field, not with a date of death. There was none. I closed it the way the coalition ledger had, the way the man's own voice had, with the fact of him leaving the mountain alive, and I let the entry say what he did, and how, in order, without the beautiful word laid over any of it. It took a long time. It is harder to write a life than a death. A death has a shape you can lean on. A life just keeps going until it stops somewhere else, ordinarily off stage, and you have to let it, and not reach for the ending that would make it mean more. Minkamalu died 40 years after Meror Pass. I found it while I was closing his file, because once you have a living man, you can follow him. And I followed him. He died in a bed, on a human world, of the thing that takes people who get to grow old. He had children. One of them had children. There is a line of people alive right now who exist, because a low-ranked man looked at a held line and a dead friend, and decided that going home was worth more than being sung. And I entered that too, the descendants, in the chronicle of the honored dead, because they were the arithmetic. They were what the past bought. A story about his glorious death would have had no room for them in it anywhere. Threa did not attend the entering, and did not last the year. Not by the bright ending. Threa, who had guarded a wound for 11,000 years, went the way the man Threa had buried and unburied went quietly, old off stage, and left instructions that there be no eulogy, which I have come to think was the truest thing Threa ever asked for. The last note in Threa's hand was filed to me, not to the house. It said only that guarding the door had been the work of a life, and that walking through it had taken an afternoon, and that Threa was sorry it had taken someone else to do the walking. I did not enter the note. Some things are not for the people. They are just for the one who receives them, and I received it, and that is enough. The house did the slow thing after. It always does. It did not announce that 100 generations had been taught a waste. Announcing it would have been its own kind of glory. And we were done, I hope, with glory. It began quietly. It reopened the 200 entries, and it worked through them one at a time, honestly. And some were deaths after all, real ones, entered rightly, and some were doors that had been painted to look like walls. And those it opened, it began to teach the sleep, and the empty road and the 6-hour retreat that makes a trap. Our young ones will learn now that there is more than one way to be worth something, and that the oldest way we had was not always the best one, and that a person may hold a line by refusing every beautiful death offered to them, and walk off the mountain on their own feet, and be honored for it. It will take 100 generations to undo what 100 generations were taught. That is all right. We are a people who keep long records. We can afford the time. I have written 409 eulogies. I did not write the 410th. The assignment still sits in the house ledger, uncompleted, and it will stay uncompleted because I went back into the file at the very end and did the last thing left to do, the small thing, the only thing that was ever really mine to decide. At the head of the chapter where for 11,000 years the record had carried a single word. The word we give the section of the chronicle that holds the ones who died well, the word that had sat over Enkamelu's name for 100 generations. The word I had been raised to believe was the highest thing a life could earn. I deleted it, and I typed in its place one word and closed the chronicle and left him as he was, survival.